I warn you ahead of time, we're very serious bunch.
Yeah.
So please no joking, because we get offended very easily.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
How's it going, everybody?
Good. How are you?
How's your Comic-Con experience?
It's good. This is my first one.
Yeah, this is really wasteful putting the mic in front of me.
Yeah.
If you need a mic for somebody, you might want to move it. I mean, it happens all the time, but you might not pick up the voices.
No, I probably won't.
So, I mean, you can move it over there if you'd like.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Isn't I touch it? Ooh,
Yeah,
I can touch
it's
mine.
okay. There we go.
There
That's
we are.
perfect. That's perfect. Actually, Shoshannah, I remember you from Jericho.
Yes. They have a booth here, actually. They want me to come down. I just didn't have a chance yet. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a shame.
I would love to come down there, though, when I have a chance.
So what is one thing that is typical of like a stereotype for people with disabilities that you guys are really hoping to end the stigma on? What is the top one for you?
I guess that's quite an answer, but I would say the big thing is that, it's just that we're capable and that we're good, and there's not enough of us out there, when that's not the case. There's a lot of talented people with disabilities. So it's just really, I think now in the modern age where you can use a DSLR camera, you can create your own content, we're seeing more and more people coming up in the world, and like Shoshannah from her show that she created. My background as a comedian, actor, producer, I've always been creating my own content, and that's led to a lot of work. So I think really it's just having a seat at the table, shows that we're good and we could be funny, or we can be just as capable.
What I want to see is more three-dimensional characters that are of different abilities, especially female ones. I feel like there is a very small box that you usually see represented, and if it is someone with a disability, especially female, it just tends to sway that way. We are only allowed to be victims, or miraculously cured, or like there's very few stories, and the story is always about the disability. And so the thing I'm fighting for most is that we get to be well-rounded humans, which does include humor and sexuality and anger and all of these things. And I know that's something very important. Shoshannah and I have had conversations about this a lot. We agree on that.
I'd say the one thing I'm really trying to change is perspective. I think so far you've seen disabled characters being written from the perspective of somebody who isn't disabled. You see it from the perspective of somebody who sees our experience as a loss. So the characters revolve around that. Their whole lives revolve around that loss. But no one's ever just one thing. Everyone is multifaceted, and most disabled people I know fit in more than one box, and there are many different things. So that's what I'd like to see reflected in the characters that we play and the roles that we're given. In front of the camera and behind the camera as well.
Yeah, I just want to add something too, which is that just because you are disabled does not mean you are victimized. It is not a sad state of affairs. And I see, especially for younger generations, I see parents raising children to believe that. I think that is partly informed by our representation in film. And in order to change that frame, we really need to have better characters out there. Because to me, you can always reframe everything to see how it is beneficial and how we are more able in other ways, and how we can add to society, and that is missed within that story of victimization.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that what we all seem to be getting at is it's about authenticity. So when you're able to really kind of show, me to be just somebody that's going to be in a fight with my wife because I forgot to DVR something, versus having to be about my height, where normally that doesn't really come to play. I don't talk about being a little person frequently. I'll address it in a situation because I'm not going to hide it when it comes up. But I think that more, you're getting senior level executive producers, creators, that have exposure to people with disabilities, then that's where you get the true stories. And I think a lot of that's happening now through film festivals, through creating your own content, being able to, tell your story, to whether it's on a smaller platform and then getting that out there to a wider mass. But I think also a big part of it is like places like Comic-Con, the big film festivals, because that's where the studios, the networks now, and the consumers are all getting together, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, people are dressing up like Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones. We need more little people in, roles.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It sounds like there's also some prejudice to overcome, too. It's like there's a preconceived notion, and that's, to break that barrier is really the only way that things are going to get better.
I think a lot of that is due to representation. I think that's where storytelling is so important, because we hardwire at a very early age, partly based on what we see in television, and we don't even realize. So I know, because I was someone who came to disability later in life, I've had to undo a lot of my own prejudices. And I realized that really a lot of the basis of those prejudices were seeing films and seeing what I admired and how to be human and learning it from that, because we pattern off of that. So that led to me realizing how important representation is.
Yeah.
Right. When I first pitched the idea for my show, This Close, originally it was a deaf woman and a hearing man, because I'd never had seen two lead characters in a show who were both deaf. I always saw a deaf person with somebody who wasn't deaf. That's always what was portrayed. And then the character arc then leads to, you have to introduce the hearing person to someone whose experience is different, and then that just goes away. And then the person leaves with the advantage, the person with the disability has educated them, and then the hearing person leaves. But what happened to the character? What happened to that deaf person? Where's the rest of their story? So when I decided to do the show ourselves, I thought, well, we can have two characters who are both deaf. And I realized that as a mindset I had, that was something that I had assumed. That's what I had seen. That's what was represented. And it's a shame that leads to how we see ourselves. We don't realize what we have in our own perspectives until we see something different. And then once we see something like that, it adds value. It's not just for the audience of people with disabilities. Most of the people who watch my show aren't deaf, but they find value in it. It's not just for us, the disabled audience. It's for everyone, and everyone benefits from that.
And I think that what's cool too is that now there's so many platforms, there's so many shows, so you always have to create something new. So the fact that we have such little exposure, you're able to really tap into stories that haven't been told. And I mean, as far as prejudice, I think part of it is it's just a lack of exposure. That's really the root of prejudice comes from. If you're not exposed to people, then even for myself, I'm a little person. I grew up hanging out with little people, and my wife's little. But I started this Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge, which is a weekend film competition where you create a film that has somebody with a disability in front of or behind the camera. But before that, I didn't really know that many people of other disabilities other than little people. And so, you realize as exposure and just being around people that you're like, oh, it's the same, you don't have to make it's a big production. It's like the different disabilities, we're all part of the same club, and I think people learn that through media, and for a lot of, I think little people have actually more exposure than a lot of other people with disabilities. Certain disabilities like you almost never see on screen.
What's interesting is, like you mentioned Peter Dinklage, the fact that he was pretty much a huge character in that saga that was watched by millions. I'm not saying it breaks down a wall, but maybe there's a little ray of sunlight that's coming through.
Oh yeah, sunlight. It is definitely sunlight, and he did a great job. And It's tough getting parts next to that.
Sure.
One of my arguments, and I know, again, lucky because we're friends, so I know some of these things we agree on, is that representation is not just about representing for the people, as Shoshannah was saying, for the people with that specific disability, or for people with disability, period. It's about the fact that if you've got intersectional representation of different groups and different ways to be, it opens the door for all of us to feel like we can belong in society. Because if you're not shown anything but a very, very narrow, specific representation of what you can and should be in the world, none of us feel like we belong. So I think that we grow as a human race. If this occurs, it's not just about, oh, I know my friends with MS will feel championed.
Yeah, and even like, Crazy Rich Asians, like that's like a prime example of people that came out that weren't Asian, that just saw it in the masses. So it's like, there's examples that are parallel to, I'm not Asian, but I enjoyed it, I loved it, I didn't have to, have that same experience. And I think good writing and good storytelling, ultimately should break that down, or you don't,
And you never know what representation out there is going to somehow make you feel seen. I've had people who come to me saying they had sex change surgery because of something I said in a panel talking about MS. Obviously, they're not the same story. They're just about the fact that I felt comfortable talking about something that I might have been shamed for, and I was open to being part of the world despite my differences, and therefore I opened the door to them to feel the same way. So again, you never know how people are going to be touched by it. So I know Shoshannah's television show has done an amazing job of that. There's so many people from varying groups that have felt seen and heard because of this representation.
So obviously you guys are trailblazers in terms of creating content with representation. What advice would you give people who with disabilities that want to get into different fields and want to their stories to be told?
I mean, for me, it's always about just doing it.
Yeah.
I think that as artists in general, whether you're disabled or not disabled, the biggest hurdle is a deadline and just getting in and saying, I'm going to do it, and continuing to do it. Because regardless, it is the toughest industry in the world. Whether you're disabled, whether you look perfect, you look like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, it's a very difficult industry. So if you don't love it, you have to love it. You have to be passionate, and you have to be relentless. And just right now, do your own stuff as much as you can, rather than wait for. I consider it almost winning the lottery when I get auditions through. I mean, I get almost all of my work through self-driven stuff.
Groundbreaking things don't mean anything unless you build something on top of it. It's just ground that's screwed up. You have to build that foundation there. And, maybe it won't be a house by the time you're done, but maybe somebody else will come along and complete it. So it's really important to keep building. Just keep building. People really like the idea of that breaking ground, something new. But the point of breaking ground is to build. And the stronger it is, the better it will be. So, there's only, and the strengths are in numbers too. So that's why it's important to really open up some definitions even. So like, what is it? The statistic is 1 in 4 Americans, I believe, has a disability. But only 2% of characters on television are shown with a disability. And of the 2% that are shown, 95%, 98% are played by able-bodied actors.
Yeah.
So that means that,
Yeah.
yeah. So the disability community is the largest minority community in America, but they're also the most underrepresented. So I think that's why, really, after making my show, my eyes were opened. I think before the attitude was, I'm not really disabled. I'm not really, I'm just deaf. I'm not really disabled. But no, there's value in seeing each other. There's value in solidarity. And really, I'm fighting for people to recognize that diversity and disability are the same thing. They are the same thing. They need to be put together. Right now, they're seen as two different conversations, and they really need to be put into the same conversation together.
I actually remember seeing a movie where, or I forget what it was. It was a mother and daughter, and the daughter was hearing impaired. And the funny thing about it was that was never mentioned during the whole movie. It was just part of the norm. And I thought that was amazing.
That used to be a very rare occurrence.
Yeah, it was very rare. That's why it caught my attention.
Yeah.
I go, wow, it wasn't even mentioned. And actually, you're watching it, and you don't even give it a second thought. I mean, that's the nature of these characters, and you just accept them.
There's something, even though I am the least allowed to be part of this conversation because I am not a filmmaker particularly. I grew up around filmmaking, and one of the things I used to say to filmmakers, period, is by breaking the rules, you make the rules. A lot of times in film school, you see they're teaching this is the way the film industry works, but really it's just based on one success where someone broke the rules, and that's now the new rule.
Yeah.
And I think that that's very important when it comes to representation. Don't try to be like something that existed before and was successful, and try to model off of that, because we don't have a lot of examples. What we need to do is create a new way of storytelling.
And I think it's also about collaboration. That's like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
To look to people within film schools that you're friends with, and help other people and work on other sets. Even if you want to be an actor, maybe you can work as a PA or as a camera person or editor or other things. Help other people, and then they will help you. And the more you're on set and around other people, I think the more you're able to kind of widen your net and also put yourself in a position to get more work.
I know Shoshannah has been hugely supportive of me, because I am going through this transition where I'm trying to accept myself and learn where I fit in the world, and this has been happening for the last couple of years. And just in the time that we've gotten to know each other, it's very empowering. We tease that we inspire each other because
I feel it. I don't know. It's a team. I feel that.
But really, I feel like, it's wonderful that we collaborate and that we have this solidarity, and it's a wonderful feeling. And Rachel does inspire me. She inspired me to write a movie about the two of us. About the similarities and the differences in the disability experience. I feel like, often it's seen as one thing, the disabled experience. And, obviously the three of us have very different experiences, and we have different needs. And, it's possible for one person to completely not understand the other person, their needs. And I think that's funny. So when I first met her, she did inspire me, and still today.
Same. But also, I think because of the perspectives we come from, both of us are more willing to ask each other the questions and be willing to say, I don't know that perspective, and please tell me, where I think a lot of people coming from a different perspective feel uncomfortable asking those questions. And so it's made it an easier friendship, and mean so much more, because we can have those important discussions that I wish more people would have.
I think that's even comes from beyond that. Like kids, I've noticed always have the least filter, and I think it's actually a good thing, to come up, you're little, whatever, and then it's done. We're not talking about it. They're not really thinking about it. We go through those moments, and I think that that's something cool that can happen, and I think that happens through film and media. But I like this movie idea, man. What if let's combine all three disabilities in one movie? Come on.
So what's this movie?
Yeah.
What is it? Curious.
No.
Let's announce it right here. Come on.
I want to see how Rachel does. I wrote it. I've seen it every day, so let's see.
It's a beautiful story about two humans and two friends, and about friendship and learning to navigate through things that we don't completely understand and that sometimes make life difficult. And I love the fact, though, that the thing you walk away with is these are human beings. And we're not trying to be perfect in any way. Shoshannah's writing is just incredible.
Yes.
So it was the biggest honor in the world to be able to read and imagine myself as part of a Shoshannah production.
I mean, it's basically a buddy comedy if you look at it, but about
Yes.
two women who are disabled.
Yeah.
And one's been disabled since birth, and one has recently been disabled, and one is going through divorce, then moves in with the friend, and they had been childhood friends, and then had their relationship fizzled out, and then they re-encounter each other. I call it a mix between Blockers and Frozen.
That's a good mix.
Because it's a love
a great
story
elevator
about the
speech.
friendship
Yeah.
between the two women. Yeah.
That was so much more professional. You did. You saw that. I'm like,
What do you need from us? What do you need from
Yeah.
us?
now we
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. You heard it here first.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
yeah, this is an exclusive.
Yeah.
There you go.
Amazing.
I'd see that movie. Yeah. I'd see
Awesome.
Has there been a particular movie or television show that you feel has accurately represented you that you would recommend to other people to watch?
My show.
Yeah. I think that goes without saying.
Yeah, no, This Close was one of the first times that I was able to see a story about humans, and it just happened that there was a difference in their life experience. And I got to learn from that. I just saw a show recently, called Years and Years, which is a BBC HBO production, and I was really impressed. It's one of the first times I've seen a character in a wheelchair where they didn't draw live attention, and she's a full, well-rounded human. She goes on dates, and most of the awkwardness and any discussion about her being in a wheelchair just comes from the outside, not from her. And she doesn't leave a lot of room for people to be uncomfortable. And that taught me something about how to better handle other people's experience with my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I would say also, obviously, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad. Aside from your show, there's a show, Rami, which has an amazing arc of this character, Steve Way, that actually won Best Actor in the Easter Sales Disability Film Challenge a couple years ago. But the show is so great. They really go into, with him, he's best friends growing up with the guy who created it and wrote it. So they were able to go into showing stuff that you just wouldn't see, and helping somebody like onto a toilet, off a toilet, and just having regular dialogue about like something else, like, oh, what do you think about work? Where it's like, that's, having somebody, I've had a lot of surgery and things, and I've been on the other end of that, so I was like, wow, that was so authentic that you're not talking about what you're doing, you're just talking about random other daily life, and it's just great dialogue and writing to be able to have that as the action going on.
I thought A Quiet Place was awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really great. Just very simple idea that worked so phenomenally well. It takes on the authentic identity. They found a star. I mean, just really, she's the heart of the movie, and it's really about what parents will do for a child. That's really what it is. It doesn't have anything to do with whether a child's disabled or not. And again, the child's disability added value, and ends up, saving the family in the end. And that's really what happens within a family dynamic, I think. It's not that if a child's disabled, it's a loss. It adds family. It doesn't break a family. The perspective is often that it breaks a family. I mean, sometimes that happens, but I think that's probably because something was already broken. Most of the time.
Yeah.
So I think that movie was a great example of a really great analogy to what it means to be parents.
Yeah.
In this strange world and they're still trying to figure out how to make it. So I cried because I was a new mom at the time, and so I kind of forgot that the character in the child was deaf. It was more about being a mom, thinking, yeah, I would do that for my daughter. I would. So I just thought it was beautiful and well done.
That was awesome.
And when we make our film, that will be the best representation.
Right now, next year you'll be at Comic-Con, and
There you go. That's
that'll
the
be
way
the
to
Next year, right? Yeah, next year. Oh, fine. We'll shoot it next week. It's
Start
fine.
shooting tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So what can fans do to help end stigmas? Just consume more content or tweet about it or things like that?
And have the conversations. And I will say, the biggest shifts that I've seen in my life are often from, quote, able-bodied people and friends and allies who have stood up for me sometimes when I was afraid to stand up for myself. It's very hard when you do have something that maybe you feel shame about, even if we shouldn't. I have a tendency to try to be unobtrusive, and I'm a bit of an introvert, so I don't always assert myself, and it's an amazing thing when friends assert for me, like, no, this is not accessible, no, you need to have this. And I think we need a lot of allies from the able-bodied community, non-disabled allies within the film industry, within the, as an audience member, saying we need things to change. It's not going to be just our voices that is going to make the difference.
Just going to give you a 2-minute warning before
Sure.
we switch people's things.
Yeah,
I think disabled people always are going to need allies. And sometimes it's easy for me, to speak out or be outraged about other people's experience than my own. Because I think you get so used to, oh, that's okay, just rolling with it, shirking things off, but now if somebody who was able-bodied says something to me, changed my frame. That's what the able-bodied person said, was the interpreter's not actually for you, Shoshannah. The interpreter's for all the hearing people in the room. You communicate fine. Your language is very accessible, but the interpreter's helping everybody else understand you.
Yep.
And I thought, wow, I had literally never thought of it that way. I thought, oh no, I don't want to ask for interpreters. I can figure it out. I can be reasonable. And then I realized I really appreciated that reframing. So now I feel like I want to pass on that to other people and to keep fighting for other people too. So if fans can definitely do that, tell them say they want an interpreter or they want a ramp or the things that they need, so that that they see that Rachel. I want to see Rachel. Rachel doesn't need a ramp. She's fine, but I want to see her on stage. So instead of putting her down the floor, make sure she get a ramp. So the fans have to ask for the ramp. So instead of Rachel being stuck on the ground, the fans need to demand a ramp so that we could see Rachel on stage.
And we also need to demand that they have interpreters.
Yes. Yes.
Because the truth is, a lot of times these things are cost prohibitive, and that's the untold story. Much of the time is we are not hired or brought onto a set or at a convention or so forth because they don't know that it will be cost effective, because they're going to have to pay for an interpreter or a ramp or to make something ADA accessible.
but a lot,
But that can change if there's a sense that there is actually demand, because people aren't always very smart, and they will say, well, we only have 3 deaf people who show up, or we only have 2 people in wheelchairs, so Rachel will only reach 2 people. Or Shoshannah will only reach 2 people.
But I think that all gets.
And so we need to reframe that.
Yeah. No, I was just, my thought was just all goes back to what you said to begin with, what can be done more, and that's more exposure for Twitter and the other stuff, because if you're only saying 2 people, if we now have 10,000 people tweeting about, hey, there wasn't an interpreter, it's not that hard of an issue if it's going to cost a couple $100 versus make something look bad. And if the people, we have the power on our side in some sense of social media and being like, hey, people want this, you know, and showing it and being, and the same thing with content. When we, I try to retweet as much as whenever I see, trailers for your show, and I think I see so many other people in the disability community, but having other allies do that is helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just real quick, Shoshannah, where can we see your program?
Send.
So it's now on Sundance TV.
Nice.
It used to be on Skynet. Now it's Sundance.
Excellent.
Sundance TV.
Also, iTunes.
Yes, kind
That's
of.
where I
Yeah.
watch it all.
Oh, okay.
I didn't hear.
iTunes.
iTunes, yeah.
Oh yeah, also on iTunes.
Nice.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Season 2 will be on Sundance TV.
2 seasons, excellent.
Yes. September 12th, it's coming. The trailer is going to be released this week.
Wow.
It's a GCA. On Wednesday or Thursday it'll be released. Season 2. Yes, so excited for that.
Nice. Real nice. Oh, yeah, I gotta see it.
Oh, yeah.
I have Sundance.
Oh, yeah.
Such a good show.